Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the suffocating world of Victorian drawing rooms, where beneath layers of silk and satin, a much darker story unfolds. You can almost smell the stale perfume masking unwashed bodies, feel the scratchy wool against skin that hasn't seen soap in weeks, and hear the whispered complaints of mysterious ailments that doctors simply couldn't explain. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for about why our great-great-grandmothers seemed to die from the most peculiar illnesses. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Feel free to comment where and when you started watching this video, or maybe give a compliment about how these historical mysteries help you drift off to sleep. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You find yourself lacing up a corset in 1875 London, pulling the strings tighter and tighter until your ribs ache and your breathing becomes shallow. This isn't vanity speaking, this is survival in a world where a woman's worth is measured by the circumference of her waist. But as you cinch that final inch, you're unknowingly creating the perfect storm for disease. The corset, that symbol of Victorian femininity, becomes your body's worst enemy. You wear the same undergarments for weeks at a time, the fabric growing damp with perspiration that never quite dries in the cool English climate. The whalebone stays dig into your flesh, creating small wounds that never heal properly because the corset is never removed long enough for your skin to breathe. These tiny cuts become gateways for infection, festering beneath layers of unwashed cotton and silk. The medical establishment of the time documented alarming rates of what they called corseted consumption, a form of tuberculosis that seemed to particularly affect young women of the upper classes. You develop a persistent cough, but attribute it to the fashionable delicacy expected of ladies. Your compressed lungs struggle to expand fully, creating stagnant pockets where bacteria thrive. The tubercle bacillus finds these weakened, oxygen-starved tissues irresistible, multiplying in the warm, moist environment created by your tightly bound torso. Your skin beneath the corset develops what Victorian doctors politely termed dress eruptions, angry red welts and pustules that spread across your back and sides. The combination of trapped moisture, friction from the stays, and the accumulation of dead skin cells creates an ideal breeding ground for Staphylococcus bacteria. These infections often spread to your bloodstream, causing mysterious fevers that puzzle even the most learned physicians of the day. The pressure of your corset creates what modern medicine recognizes as a perfect environment for anaerobic bacteria, microorganisms that thrive without oxygen. Deep beneath the tight fabric, these dangerous pathogens multiply in the compressed flesh, creating abscesses that eat away at your tissue from the inside. You attribute the constant burning sensation to the natural discomfort of proper feminine dress, never realizing that your body is literally rotting beneath the whalebone and steel. The tight lacing doesn't just affect your torso, it creates a domino effect throughout your entire system. Your compressed stomach cannot properly digest food, leading to chronic malnutrition that leaves you vulnerable to every passing illness. The acidic contents of your squeezed stomach often reflux upward, creating persistent heartburn and throat irritation that doctors mistake for signs of tuberculosis. Your intestines, crushed into unnatural positions, develop pockets where food and waste accumulate, creating breeding grounds for harmful bacteria that cause everything from chronic diarrhea to life-threatening intestinal blockages. Even your heart suffers under the constant pressure. The compressed rib cage forces your heart to work harder to pump blood through constricted vessels, leading to cardiac arrhythmias and chest pains that the Victorian physicians attribute to female hysteria. The reduced oxygen in your bloodstream, caused by your inability to breathe deeply, creates a constant state of mild suffocation that leaves you dizzy, confused, and prone to fainting spells. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with tight lacing was driven more by fashion or by a subconscious desire to control women's bodies and health. What isn't debated is the devastating health consequences that follow these beauty standards. Your spine, forced to maintain an unnatural curve by the rigid stays, develops permanent deformities that create chronic pain radiating through your back and shoulders. The compressed vertebrae pinch nerves, causing numbness in your arms and hands that make simple tasks like writing or sewing increasingly difficult. Some Victorian women developed what doctors called corset spine, a condition where the backbone actually curved permanently to accommodate the shape of their undergarments. The relentless pressure also affects your kidneys, which struggle to filter waste from your compressed abdominal cavity. You develop frequent urinary tract infections that spread upward, causing kidney inflammation and the persistent back pain that Victorian women stoically endure as part of their feminine burden. The restricted blood flow to your extremities leaves your hands and feet chronically cold and prone to chilblains, painful, infected swellings that plague you through the damp English winters. Your lymphatic system, responsible for fighting infection, becomes severely compromised by the constant constriction. The lymph nodes under your arms and around your torso cannot drain properly, leading to chronic swelling and an inability to combat even minor infections. A simple scratch becomes a festering wound that refuses to heal, while common colds develop into pneumonia with frightening regularity. The social pressure to maintain your corseted figure means you never seek relief. You sleep in a loosened but still worn corset, eat in a corset, and even bathe while wearing a specially designed washing corset. Your body never experiences true freedom from this torturous device, and the accumulated damage begins to show in ways that Victorian society chooses to romanticize rather than address. Strange as it sounds, some Victorian women actually developed a condition doctors called corset liver, where the constant pressure literally reshaped the organ, causing it to protrude in unnatural ways. Your liver, compressed day after day, begins to fail in its essential function of processing toxins, leading to jaundice, fatigue, and a sickly yellow pallor that Victorian literature celebrates as ethereal beauty. The most sinister aspect of corset-related disease is how it masquerades as feminine virtue. Your shallow breathing caused by compressed lungs is seen as ladylike restraint. Your pale complexion, caused by poor circulation and organ damage, becomes the epitome of refined beauty. Your frequent fainting spells, caused by restricted blood flow and oxygen deprivation, are romanticized as evidence of your sensitive nature. The psychological toll proves just as devastating as the physical damage. The constant pain and discomfort create a state of chronic stress that weakens your immune system further. You develop what modern medicine would recognize as anxiety and depression, but Victorian doctors dismiss these symptoms as natural female weakness. The inability to breathe properly affects your brain function, leading to memory problems and difficulty concentrating that society attributes to the supposed inferiority of the female intellect. As you move through your daily routine, you begin to understand why Victorian literature is filled with frail, consumptive heroines who fade away mysteriously. These weren't literary devices. They were accurate reflections of a society where women's bodies were systematically weakened by fashion demands. The pale complexion and delicate constitution so prized in Victorian beauty standards weren't natural gifts. They were symptoms of chronic illness caused by the very garments meant to enhance feminine appeal. Your corset becomes a silent killer, creating a cascade of health problems that Victorian medicine is woefully unprepared to address. Each day brings new discomfort, new mysterious symptoms, and new evidence that the price of fashionable femininity might just be your life itself. You wake each morning and reach for your powder compact, unaware that you're about to poison yourself with the dedication of a devoted ritual. The arsenic-laced cosmetics sitting on your dressing table gleam with an otherworldly beauty that mirrors the deadly allure they hold over Victorian women like yourself. Each application brings you closer to a slow, mysterious death that doctors will struggle to diagnose for decades to come. The white face powder you pat so carefully across your cheeks contains enough arsenic to kill a small animal. Yet you apply it daily with the religious fervour of a woman determined to achieve that coveted porcelain complexion. The arsenic gives your skin an ethereal, translucent quality that Victorian society prizes above all else. The paler you appear, the more refined and upper class you seem. What you don't realise is that this ghostly pallor isn't just fashionable. It's the first visible sign of chronic arsenic poisoning slowly eating away at your body from the inside. Your daily beauty routine becomes a methodical form of self-destruction. The rouge you brush across your lips contains mercury and lead compounds that create that perfect rosy flush. But these heavy metals accumulate in your organs with each application. The kohl you carefully line around your eyes contains antimony, a toxic metalloid that causes severe eye infections and, over time, blindness. Victorian women often complained of mysterious eye ailments, attributing them to reading by candlelight rather than the poisonous cosmetics they applied religiously each morning. The process of applying your makeup becomes an elaborate dance with death. You dip your fingers into pots of powder that sparkle with crystalline particles of pure arsenic, each grain more potent than the last. The manufacturers discovered that arsenic compounds created the most desirable white pigments, and they marketed these deadly concoctions with names like Oriental Pearl Powder and Venetian Bloom. The more expensive the cosmetic, the more arsenic it contained, making beauty literally a luxury that could kill you. The most insidious part of arsenic poisoning is how slowly it works. You begin to notice that your fingernails develop strange white lines running horizontally across them. What we now recognise as Mises lines, a telltale sign of arsenic exposure. Your hair starts falling out in clumps, but you attribute this to the stress of maintaining a proper household. The constant stomach cramping and nausea you experience becomes so normal that you barely mention it to your physician, who would likely diagnose it as female hysteria anyway. The social pressure to maintain your cosmetic routine means you never connect your declining health to your beauty regimen. Victorian medical journals from the period document thousands of cases of mysterious wasting diseases among fashionable women, describing symptoms that modern medicine immediately recognises as heavy metal poisoning. Yet Victorian doctors, trained to see women's bodies as inherently weak and prone to mysterious ailments, rarely looked beyond their patients' supposed moral failings or hereditary weaknesses. Historians still argue whether cosmetic manufacturers of the era knew about the toxic effects of their products, or simply didn't care about women's health in pursuit of profit. What's certain is that Victorian women were unknowingly participating in a mass poisoning experiment disguised as beauty enhancement. Your skin begins to develop a peculiar scaling and darkening, particularly on your palms and the soles of your feet. The arsenic disrupts your body's ability to produce healthy skin cells, causing a condition called hyperkeratosis that makes your skin thick, rough, and discoloured. Victorian medical journals documented thousands of cases of mysterious skin conditions among upper-class women, never making the connection to their cosmetic habits. The neurological effects prove even more devastating than the physical symptoms. The heavy metals in your cosmetics cross the blood-brain barrier, causing memory problems, confusion, and what Victorian doctors politely termed nervous exhaustion. You find yourself forgetting simple words mid-conversation, stumbling over familiar tasks, and experiencing strange sensations of pins and needles in your hands and feet. The peripheral neuropathy caused by chronic metal poisoning makes it difficult to perform delicate work like embroidery or playing the piano, accomplishments that define a proper Victorian lady. Your digestive system bears the brunt of the daily arsenic assault. The metal irritates your stomach lining, causing chronic gastritis that leaves you unable to keep down solid food for days at a time. You develop what doctors call arsenical dysentery, violent episodes of bloody diarrhea that leave you weak and dehydrated. Victorian women often died from what appeared to be gastric fever or intestinal inflammation, never suspecting that their beauty routine was literally corroding their internal organs. The lead in your cosmetics creates its own set of horrific symptoms. Lead poisoning causes a condition called painter's colic, excruciating abdominal cramps that double you over in pain. Your gums develop a distinctive blue-black line along the edges, and your breath takes on a sweet metallic taste that no amount of tooth powder can eliminate. The lead interferes with your body's ability to produce red blood cells, leaving you chronically anemic and exhausted. Perhaps most tragically, the toxic cosmetics affect your reproductive system in ways that Victorian medicine cannot comprehend. The heavy metals disrupt your menstrual cycle, causing irregular bleeding and severe cramping that doctors attribute to moral failings or excessive reading. If you become pregnant, the accumulated toxins in your body cross the placental barrier, causing birth defects, miscarriages, and stillbirths that devastate Victorian families who have no idea why their children are born with developmental problems or fail to survive infancy. Your teeth begin to loosen and fall out as the lead and mercury in your cosmetics attack the bone structure of your jaw. The heavy metals interfere with calcium absorption, causing your bones to become brittle and weak. Victorian dentistry, primitive as it was, couldn't explain why fashionable women seemed to lose their teeth at alarming rates, often attributing dental problems to excessive tea drinking or too much sugar consumption. Your kidneys struggle desperately to filter the constant influx of toxins from your bloodstream. The arsenic crystallizes in your kidney tubules, causing permanent scarring and a gradual decline in function that manifests as chronic back pain, frequent urination, and persistent thirst. Many Victorian women died of what appeared to be kidney failure, their families never suspecting that years of cosmetic use had slowly destroyed these vital organs. The psychological effects of chronic metal poisoning create their own nightmare. The arsenic interferes with neurotransmitter production in your brain, causing severe depression, anxiety, and mood swings that Victorian society dismisses as natural female volatility. You experience periods of manic energy followed by crushing fatigue, personality changes that strain your relationships, and episodes of paranoia that make you suspicious of everyone around you. Your immune system, overwhelmed by the constant need to process toxins, begins to fail in spectacular fashion. Minor cuts refuse to heal, developing into festering sores that spread across your body. You catch every cold, every fever, every contagious disease that passes through your household, and each illness hits you harder and lasts longer than it should. The arsenic suppresses your bone marrow's ability to produce white blood cells, leaving you defenseless against infections that healthy people would fight off easily. The irony cuts deep. In your quest for beauty, you've made yourself uglier with each passing day. The cosmetics that promise to enhance your appearance have left you gaunt, sickly, and prematurely aged. Your skin, once smooth and clear, now bears the mottled discoloration of chronic poisoning. Your hair, once your crowning glory, hangs limp and thin where it hasn't fallen out entirely. But Victorian society has trained you to see this deterioration as romantic fragility, the delicate constitution of a refined lady rather than the symptoms of systematic self-poisoning. Your hair has become a magnificent fortress of filth, an elaborate architectural marvel that hasn't seen soap or water in over 3 months. You sit before your dressing table mirror, admiring the towering construction that took your lady's maid 4 hours to arrange yesterday, completely unaware that your beautiful coiffure has become a thriving ecosystem of parasites, bacteria, and disease that threatens not just your own health, but the lives of everyone in your household. The fashion for elaborate hairstyles in Victorian society demands that your hair remain untouched for weeks at a time to maintain its intricate shape. Your locks are twisted, pinned, padded with horsehair, and cemented into place with a mixture of bear grease, pomade, and starch that creates the perfect breeding ground for every imaginable form of microscopic life. The layers of styling products trap dirt, sweat, and dead skin cells, creating a warm, moist environment where bacteria multiply with terrifying efficiency. You feel the first telltale itch behind your left ear, gentle tickling that you dismiss as nervous sensitivity. What you don't realise is that a family of head lice has just established residence in your unwashed locks, and they're already busy laying eggs in the greasy foundation of your hairstyle. Within days, hundreds of tiny parasites will be feasting on your scalp, their bites creating open wounds that become infected with the countless bacteria thriving in your hair's putrid ecosystem. The pomade you applied months ago has gone rancid, creating a nauseating smell that you mask with increasingly heavy applications of lavender water and rose oil. These perfumes don't eliminate the odour, they simply create a sickly sweet mask that makes the underlying stench even more disturbing. Your family has grown accustomed to the peculiar aroma that follows you through the house, attributing it to your dedication to fashionable grooming rather than recognising it as the smell of decomposition. Victorian medical journals documented alarming outbreaks of typhus that seemed to originate in the elaborate hairstyles of fashionable women. The disease, carried by lice and other parasites, spread rapidly through households where women maintain their coiffures for months without washing. You become an unwitting typhus factory, harbouring the infected lice that will eventually jump to your servants, your children, and your husband, carrying the deadly rickettsia bacteria that causes high fever, severe headaches, and often death. The weight of your unwashed hair creates constant tension on your scalp, leading to what Victorian doctors termed hair headaches, chronic pain that radiates from your skull down through your neck and shoulders. The accumulated grime and styling products pull at your hair follicles, causing them to become infected and inflamed. Many of your hairs have already died at the root, held in place only by the hardened pomade, creating bald patches that you desperately try to conceal with additional padding and false pieces. Historians still argue whether Victorian women truly understood the health risks of their elaborate hair maintenance routines or simply prioritised fashion over hygiene to a degree that seems incomprehensible today. What isn't disputed is the devastating impact these practices had on public health, particularly in crowded urban areas where diseases could spread rapidly. The bacteria thriving in your hair don't limit themselves to your scalp. They migrate down to your phaeton, causing a persistent rash around your hairline that you attribute to sensitivity to your face powder. The infected pustules spread to your neck and shoulders, creating what looks like a plague of boils that Victorian medicine struggles to treat. The constant scratching you can't resist, corsets, creates open wounds that provide perfect entry points for more serious infections. Your unwashed locks become a reservoir for diseases that extend far beyond simple parasitic infections, streptococcus bacteria, which cause scarlet fever and other deadly ailments. Thrive in the warm, moist environment of your hair. When you lean close to kiss your children goodnight, you're potentially exposing them to pathogens that could kill them within days. Victorian families often lost multiple children to mysterious fevers that seemed to appear from nowhere, never suspecting that mother's fashionable hairstyle was the source of the contagion. The starch and flour used to powder your hair attract rats and mice, which burrow into your elaborate coiffure while you sleep. These rodents carry their own collection of diseases, including the bubonic plague bacteria that still lurks in European cities. You wake with strange bite marks on your scalp, attributing them to restless sleep rather than recognizing them as evidence that your hair has become a nesting ground for vermin. The psychological toll of maintaining your unwashed hairstyle begins to manifest in disturbing ways. The constant itching drives you to distraction, but Victorian propriety prevents you from scratching in public, leading to a state of chronic agitation that affects your mood and behaviour. The smell, which you've grown nose-blind to, creates social isolation as friends and family unconsciously avoid close contact with you. Your scalp develops what we now recognise as seborrheic dermatitis, a severe inflammatory condition caused by the overgrowth of naturally occurring fungi that feed on the accumulated oils and dead skin in your hair. The condition causes intense itching, and the formation of yellowish crusts that cement your hair into an even more impenetrable mass. Victorian doctors, puzzled by these scalp conditions, often prescribed treatments that made the problems worse, including mercury-based ointments that added heavy metal poisoning to your list of ailments. The infection in your scalp eventually spreads to your lymph nodes, causing painful swelling behind your ears and at the base of your skull. These swollen glands are your body's desperate attempt to fight off the constant bacterial assault emanating from your hair, but they're overwhelmed by the sheer volume of pathogens they're trying to process. The lymphatic system, designed to handle occasional infection, simply cannot cope with the constant stream of bacteria and toxins flowing from your unwashed scalp. Sleep becomes increasingly difficult as the parasites in your hair become more active during nighttime hours. The lice and mites that call your coiffure home are most active when you're lying still. Crawling across your scalp and face in search of fresh blood, you develop chronic insomnia, tossing and turning as invisible creatures march across your skin, but Victorian medicine attributes your sleep problems to female hysteria rather than parasitic infestation. The most horrifying aspect of your hair's condition is how it serves as a breeding ground for diseases that spread beyond your immediate household. When you attend social gatherings, theatre performances, or church services, the parasites and bacteria in your hair transfer to the upholstery, spreading to other women who sit in the same seats. Victorian society becomes an interconnected web of disease transmission, with fashionable hairstyles serving as the primary vector for epidemics that puzzle medical authorities. Your beautiful, elaborate coiffure has become a weapon of mass infection, a testament to how Victorian society's obsession with appearance created health disasters that claimed thousands of lives. Each morning, as you admire your reflection in the mirror, you're looking at a carefully constructed monument to the deadly consequences of prioritizing fashion over basic hygiene. You lift the delicate china teacup to your lips, unaware that the clear, sparkling water within contains enough deadly bacteria to kill your entire dinner party. The water pump in your fashionable London neighbourhood draws from the same Thames tributary that receives the sewage from thousands of homes. But Victorian society has convinced itself that boiling water for tea somehow purifies what flows from contaminated wells and springs. Your afternoon social gathering is about to become ground zero for a cholera outbreak that will sweep through the drawing rooms of high society like wildfire. The water you serve to your distinguished guests comes from a well that sits mere feet from the cesspit behind your kitchen. Victorian urban planning, such as it exists, makes no allowance for the basic principle that human waste and drinking water should never mix. The brick-lined well that provides your household's water supply has developed cracks over the years, allowing sewage to seep through the soil and contaminate every drop that rises from the underground source. Your cook draws this tainted water each morning, never suspecting that she's filling your kettles and pitchers with a liquid cocktail of deadly pathogens. The cholera bacterium thrives in the warm, nutrient-rich environment of contaminated water, multiplying exponentially in the standing water of your household cisterns, Vibrio cholerae, invisible to the naked eye, transforms your elegant tea service into an efficient delivery system for one of the most devastating diseases of the Victorian era. As you and your guests sip your afternoon tea and nibble delicate sandwiches, you're unknowingly consuming billions of bacteria that will soon turn your digestive systems into fountains of infectious fluid. The first symptoms appear within hours of your genteel gathering. Mrs. Whitmore, who complimented your Earl Grey so enthusiastically, begins experiencing violent stomach cramps during her carriage ride home. By evening, she's doubled over with explosive diarrhea that seems to pour from her body like water from a broken tap. The massive fluid loss characteristic of cholera begins immediately, and within 24 hours, she's lost so much water that her skin becomes loose and wrinkled. Her eyes sink deep into their sockets, and her pulse becomes barely detectable. Victorian medical understanding of cholera remains tragically inadequate. With most physicians still believing in the miasma theory, the idea that diseases spread through bad air rather than contaminated water, your family doctor, summoned to treat the mysterious illness spreading through your social circle, prescribes bloodletting and laudanum, treatments that actually accelerate death by further dehydrating patients who are already losing dangerous amounts of fluid. The medical establishment's ignorance transforms what could be treatable cases into death sentences, The disease spreads through your household with terrifying efficiency. Your servants, who also drink the contaminated well water and eat food prepared with it, begin falling ill one by one. The scullery maid collapses while washing dishes, her body racked with the characteristic rice water stools of cholera that contain billions of bacteria ready to infect the next victim. The cook, despite her protest that she feels fine, unknowingly contaminates every meal she prepares, her hands carrying the invisible pathogens from her own mild infection to every surface in the kitchen. Historians still argue whether Victorian authorities genuinely didn't understand the connection between sewage and drinking water, or simply found it politically convenient to ignore the evidence that would require expensive infrastructure improvements. What's undeniable is that thousands of women died from waterborne diseases that could have been prevented with basic sanitation measures. Your children become victims of the contaminated water supply in ways that Victorian medicine cannot comprehend. The infant mortality rate in your neighbourhood reaches staggering proportions as babies consume formula mixed with cholera-laden water, or drink contaminated milk from cows that graze near polluted streams. Your youngest daughter develops what doctors call summer complaint, chronic diarrhea that slowly dehydrates her tiny body until her skin becomes paper thin and her cries become weak whispers. Victorian physicians attribute these infant deaths to teething problems or overfeeding rather than recognizing the waterborne epidemic devastating entire communities. The social implications of the cholera outbreak create their own form of suffering. Victorian society's rigid class structure means that wealthy families like yours initially believe they're immune to diseases that affect the poor. When cholera begins claiming lives in fashionable neighbourhoods, the cognitive dissonance creates panic and denial. Your social circle fragments as families flee to the countryside, leaving behind those too ill to travel and creating ghost towns in previously vibrant urban areas. The contaminated water affects more than just your digestive system. The bacteria and parasites thriving in your household water supply cause a cascade of infections that Victorian doctors struggle to connect. You develop chronic kidney problems as your organs work overtime to filter toxins from the polluted water you consume daily. Your skin breaks out in mysterious rashes as your body tries to eliminate waste products through alternative channels when your kidneys can no longer cope with the bacterial load. Your husband, despite his apparent robust health, begins showing signs of what we now recognise as chronic low-level poisoning from contaminated water. His mental faculties start to decline as heavy metals and bacterial toxins accumulate in his brain tissue. Victorian society attributes his increasing confusion and irritability to the stress of business, rather than recognising it as evidence of neurological damage from long-term exposure to polluted water sources. The water contamination creates breeding grounds for diseases that extend far beyond cholera. Typhoid bacteria thrive in the same conditions, causing the mysterious brain fever that claims so many Victorian lives. Dysentery spreads through households via contaminated washing water, causing bloody diarrhea that slowly kills through dehydration and blood loss. Hepatitis viruses multiply in polluted water sources, causing the yellow fever epidemics that periodically devastate urban populations. Your elaborate dinner parties become unwitting super spreader events, as guests carry contaminated water home in their stomachs and spread diseases to their own households. The interconnected nature of Victorian society, with its constant round of social calls and shared meals, creates perfect conditions for waterborne epidemics to spread rapidly through entire communities. A single contaminated well can ultimately affect hundreds of families as the diseases it harbours spread through social networks. The most tragic aspect of the water contamination crisis is how it particularly affects women and children, who spend more time in homes where contaminated water is used for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. Victorian women, already weakened by corsets and toxic cosmetics, have little resistance to waterborne diseases that attack their already compromised immune systems. The combination of multiple health assaults creates a perfect storm of vulnerability that claims lives with shocking efficiency. Your beautiful home, with its elegant furnishings and refined atmosphere, conceals a deadly secret in every pitcher of water, every cup of tea, and every meal prepared in the kitchen. The contamination that flows from your taps carries with it the concentrated waste and disease of thousands of your neighbours, transforming your domestic sanctuary into a breeding ground for epidemics that will echo through generations of Victorian families. You stand before your wardrobe, selecting a borrowed silk gown for tonight's opera performance, completely unaware that the previous owner died of smallpox while wearing this very dress. The elaborate garment, with its layers of unwashed fabric and intricate beadwork, carries more than just the lingering scent of her perfume. It harbours the infectious remnants of diseases that will soon claim new victims among London's fashionable elite. Victorian society's casual attitude towards sharing clothing creates an invisible network of contagion that spreads deadly illnesses from wardrobe to wardrobe, transforming the simple act of borrowing a dress into a potentially fatal transaction. The practice of sharing garments among Victorian women stems from both economic necessity and social custom. Even wealthy families find it impractical to maintain extensive wardrobes for every possible social occasion, leading to an elaborate system of lending and borrowing that spans entire social circles. Your friend's mourning dress, still heavy with the grief and germs of 3 different funerals, hangs in your closet waiting for the next family tragedy. The ball gown you wore to the Hendersons' anniversary celebration will soon grace another woman's shoulders, carrying with it whatever pathogens you've collected during your evening of dancing and socializing. The fabric of your borrowed evening wear becomes a repository for every disease that touched its previous wearers. Smallpox viruses, remarkably resilient and capable of surviving for months in dried scabs and clothing fibres, lurk in the intricate folds of silk and velvet. The dress you've chosen for tonight's entertainment last belonged to Lady Margaret, who attended a charity bazaar while unknowingly in the early stages of variola major. Her fever broke just as she returned home, but not before her perspiration soaked the dress's bodice with billions of infectious particles that dried into the fabric like invisible seeds of death. The elaborate cleaning rituals of Victorian society prove woefully inadequate against the microscopic threats embedded in shared clothing. Your lady's maid brushes the gown carefully and airs it by an open window, believing this sufficient to prepare it for your wear. She has no understanding that the smallpox virus embedded in the dress's fibres requires temperatures far beyond what Victorian cleaning methods can achieve. The gentle steaming and perfuming that passes for garment care only serves to redistribute the infectious particles, creating an even more efficient delivery system for disease transmission. As you slip into the borrowed gown, the infected fabric comes into intimate contact with your skin, transferring viral particles to microscopic breaks in your epidermis caused by tight corseting and harsh soap. The smallpox virus, perfectly adapted for human-to-human transmission, finds these tiny wounds ideal entry points into your bloodstream. Within days, you'll develop the characteristic fever and body aches that Victorian doctors often misdiagnose as influenza or nervous exhaustion. never suspecting that your elegant evening wear has delivered a potentially fatal payload. Historians still argue whether Victorian society's emphasis on elaborate dress codes contributed more to disease transmission than simple overcrowding, but the evidence suggests that shared clothing created unique pathways for contagion that affected the wealthy as severely as the poor. The very practices that demonstrated social refinement became vectors for epidemic disease. The scarlet fever bacterium proves equally adept at surviving in the fibres of shared clothing. The Streptococcus bacteria that causes this childhood killer can live for weeks in the unwashed cotton of undergarments and the silk of evening dresses. Your borrowed petticoat, recently worn by a young woman recovering from what she thought was a minor throat infection, carries enough viable bacteria to infect your entire household. The bacteria multiply in the warm, moist environment created by Victorian women's multiple layers of clothing, turning each borrowed garment into a bacterial incubator. The children's clothing exchange among Victorian families creates particularly devastating chains of infection. Your daughter's friends regularly swap dresses, pinafores, and ribbons, unknowingly trading smallpox, measles, and diphtheria, along with fashion accessories. The schoolroom becomes a distribution centre for contaminated clothing, as children share cloaks during rainy weather and exchange handkerchiefs with careless generosity. A single infected hair ribbon, passed from child to child, can spark an epidemic that claims dozens of young lives. The intimate nature of Victorian undergarments makes their sharing particularly dangerous. The chemises, drawers, and corset covers that form the foundation of your wardrobe often pass between sisters, cousins, and close friends without any cleaning, more thorough than a quick airing. These garments, in direct contact with your skin for hours at a time, provide ideal conditions for bacterial transmission. The Staphylococcus and Streptococcus bacteria that cause skin infections, blood poisoning, and necrotizing fasciitis thrive in the warm, moist environment of shared underclothing. Your borrowed accessories carry their own infectious cargo. The gloves you wear to tonight's performance last touch the hands of a woman suffering from erysipelas, a severe skin infection caused by Streptococcus bacteria. The infection, characterized by bright red, swollen patches of skin, spreads easily through direct contact with contaminated surfaces. As you pull on the elegant kid gloves, the bacteria transfer to tiny cuts around your cuticles, beginning their invasion of your lymphatic system. The elaborate hat you've borrowed for Sunday service carries lice from its previous owner's unwashed hair, along with the typhus bacteria these parasites harbour. Victorian women's complex headwear, with its layers of fabric, feathers, and artificial flowers, provides countless hiding places for insects and the diseases they carry. The warm, dark environment beneath your borrowed bonnet becomes a breeding ground for parasites that will soon establish colonies in your own carefully styled locks. The mourning clothes that circulate through Victorian society carry particularly concentrated loads of infectious material. These heavy, dark garments often pass from funeral to funeral without cleaning, accumulating pathogens from multiple deceased persons and their grieving relatives. The crepe and bombazine fabric of mourning wear traps bacteria and viruses in its dense weave, creating garments that function as mobile disease repositories. Your borrowed mourning attire doesn't just help you observe social conventions, it connects you directly to the infections that kill the people you're mourning. The social pressure to appear fashionable in different outfits creates a complex web of contamination that spans entire communities. Your blue silk ball gown, after infecting you with its cargo of diseases, will continue its deadly journey to the next borrower, carrying new pathogens you have added to its collection. The dress becomes a silent historian of epidemic disease, accumulating and distributing infections as it moves through Victorian society's intricate network of social connections. The most insidious aspect of clothing-borne disease transmission is how it turns fashion itself into a weapon against health. The very garments that signal your social status and moral character become instruments of infection and death. Victorian women, trained to see elaborate dress as evidence of respectability and refinement, unknowingly participate in a system of mutual contamination that claims thousands of lives while maintaining the appearance of civilized society. You reach for the small brown bottle on your nightstand, its label promising relief from the mysterious ailments that plague your daily existence. The patent medicine industry of Victorian England has convinced you that salvation lies in these magical elixirs, but as you measure out your evening dose of Dr. Pemberton's miracle tonic, you're unknowingly consuming enough mercury to kill a horse. Your medicine cabinet has become an arsenal of poison disguised as healing, each bottle containing deadly compounds that will slowly destroy your organs while promising to restore your health and vitality. The laudanum you take for your persistent headaches contains enough opium to addle the brain of 3 grown men, but Victorian medical wisdom insists that women's delicate constitutions require stronger treatments than those prescribed for robust males. Your daily dose, which began as a few drops for menstrual discomfort, has gradually increased to tablespoons as your body develops tolerance to the narcotic. The opium alkaloids course through your bloodstream, binding to receptors in your brain, and creating a chemical dependency that Victorian doctors mistake for evidence that the medicine is working effectively. Each morning brings a ritual of self-medication that would horrify modern toxicologists. You begin with Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound for female complaints, a concoction containing 20% alcohol, along with herbs that include potentially deadly amounts of black cohosh and life root. The alcohol content alone is sufficient to intoxicate you before breakfast, but the herbal components create their own constellation of toxic effects. The black cohosh interferes with your liver's ability to process other toxins, while the life root contains alkaloids that cause progressive liver damage with each dose. Your husband insists you take Dr. William's pink pills for pale people, iron supplements laced with enough mercury to cause chronic poisoning. The mercury accumulates in your brain tissue, causing the tremors and personality changes that Victorian medicine attributes to female hysteria. Your hands shake as you pour your morning tea, and your memory becomes increasingly unreliable. But these symptoms only convince your family that you need larger doses of the mercury-laden medication that's causing your deterioration. The cough syrup you administer to your children contains morphine levels that would be considered dangerous for adult hospital patients. Yet Victorian parents dose their babies with these narcotics for everything from teething pain to restless sleep. Your youngest daughter's chronic drowsiness and failure to reach developmental milestones aren't signs of natural delicacy. They're symptoms of ongoing narcotic poisoning from the soothing syrups you lovingly administer several times daily. Historians still argue whether patent medicine manufacturers deliberately concealed the dangerous ingredients in their products, or genuinely believed that mercury, opium, and alcohol were safe therapeutic agents when combined with herbs and marketed to vulnerable populations. What's certain is that Victorian families unknowingly participated in mass poisoning experiments, while seeking relief from legitimate health concerns. Your liver struggles desperately to process the chemical assault you subject it to with each dose of patent medicine. The organ, designed to filter occasional toxins from your system, cannot cope with the daily influx of mercury, alcohol, opium, and synthetic compounds that characterize Victorian pharmacology. The resulting hepatitis causes the yellowing of your skin that you attribute to fashionable pallor, while the abdominal swelling you experience is dismissed as female trouble rather than recognized as evidence of organ failure. The arsenic-based tonics you take for energy actually cause the chronic fatigue they claim to cure, creating a vicious cycle of increasing dependence on poisonous treatments. Each dose of Fowler's solution, prescribed for everything from skin conditions to general malaise, deposits arsenic throughout your tissues, causing cellular damage that manifests as weakness, confusion, and digestive problems. Victorian doctors, observing these symptoms, prescribe additional arsenic-based treatments, believing that stronger doses will overcome your body's apparent resistance to healing. Your kidneys, already strained by the constant filtration of toxic compounds, begin to fail under the assault of patent medicine ingredients. The mercury and lead commonly found in Victorian tonics crystallize in your kidney tubules, causing permanent scarring that reduces your organ's ability to clean your blood. The resulting uremic poisoning causes the mental confusion and mood swings that your family attributes to the natural volatility of the female temperament. The patent medicine industry's marketing specifically targets women's health concerns, creating products that promise to address everything from menstrual irregularities to the vapors. Dr. Pierce's favourite prescription, marketed as a cure for female weakness, contains enough alcohol to intoxicate you in sufficient amounts of digitalis to cause dangerous heart rhythm disturbances. The plant-based compounds in these medicines often prove more toxic than helpful, with many containing cardiac glycosides, liver toxins, and neurological poisons that Victorian science cannot detect or understand. Your nervous system bears the brunt of the patent medicine assault as mercury deposits accumulate in your brain tissue, causing the tremors, memory loss, and personality changes that characterize chronic heavy metal poisoning. The Mad Hatter's disease that affects felt workers becomes your daily reality as mercury-based medicines slowly destroy your neurological function. Your family notices your increasing irritability and confusion, but attributes these changes to female hysteria rather than recognizing them as symptoms of the mercury poisoning. The morphine and opium in your daily medications create physical dependence that manifests as withdrawal symptoms whenever you attempt to reduce your doses. The sweating, nausea, and anxiety you experience when you forget to take your medicine convince you that these treatments are essential for your survival. Victorian medicine interprets these withdrawal symptoms as evidence that your condition is worsening, leading to prescriptions for even stronger narcotic treatments. Your children's exposure to patent medicines creates generational patterns of addiction and poisoning that Victorian families cannot comprehend. The soothing syrups used to quiet fussy babies contain enough opiates to suppress respiratory function, leading to the high infant mortality rates that Victorian families accept as natural. Those children who survive the narcotic exposure often develop learning difficulties and behavioural problems that persist throughout their lives. The alcohol content in patent medicines, often exceeding the percent by volume, creates widespread alcoholism among Victorian women who would never consider themselves drinkers. Your daily dose of various tonics and elixirs delivers more alcohol than most tavern patrons consume. but the medical packaging allows you to maintain your temperance convictions while becoming increasingly dependent on chemical substances. The most tragic aspect of patent medicine poisoning is how it creates the very symptoms it claims to cure. Trapping Victorian families in cycles of increasing medication dependence, your chronic fatigue, attributed to female weakness, actually results from the arsenic and mercury poisoning caused by your daily medicines. The digestive problems you experience come from the alcohol and toxic herbs in your treatments, while the neurological symptoms that plague your daily life result from the accumulation of heavy metals in your brain tissue. Your medicine cabinet, filled with bottles promising health and vitality, has become a shrine to systematic self-destruction. Each colourful label and persuasive testimonial masks a chemical weapon designed to extract money from desperate families while slowly poisoning them with compounds that Victorian science cannot identify or neutralise. The patent medicine industry has transformed your legitimate health concerns into profitable pathways for mass poisoning, disguised as medical treatment. You fold the stained cotton rag for the third time this month, preparing to use it again during your menstrual cycle, completely unaware that this seemingly innocent piece of fabric has become a breeding ground for deadly bacteria that will soon threaten your life. The Victorian approach to menstrual hygiene, shrouded in shame and ignorance, transforms a natural biological process into a potential death sentence. Your monthly period, already considered a shameful inconvenience by polite society, becomes infinitely more dangerous when managed with reused cloth strips that harbour infectious agents capable of causing septic shock and death. The cotton rags you use during menstruation are washed in cold water with harsh lye soap, a cleaning process that Victorian women believe adequate for sanitisation. However, the blood and tissue that saturate these cloths during use provide perfect nutrition for bacterial growth, and cold water washing cannot eliminate the dangerous pathogens that multiply in the fabric's fibres. Streptococcus and Staphylococcus bacteria, along with other harmful microorganisms, survive the washing process and lie dormant in the seemingly clean cloth, waiting for the warm, moist environment of your next cycle to reactivate and multiply. The shame surrounding menstruation prevents you from discussing proper hygiene practices with anyone, including your mother, who herself learned inadequate techniques from previous generations of women struggling with the same dangerous ignorance. Victorian society's conviction that menstruation is a moral failing rather than a biological function creates an atmosphere of secrecy that prevents the sharing of even basic safety information. You stumble through each monthly cycle armed only with whispered fragments of advice and the terrible example of older women who've survived their reproductive years through sheer luck rather than proper knowledge. Your intimate anatomy, already stressed by tight corseting and poor nutrition, becomes vulnerable to ascending infections when bacteria from your reused menstrual cloths migrate upward through your reproductive tract. The cervix, designed to protect your uterus from contamination, cannot defend against the concentrated bacterial assault that occurs when infected fabric remains in contact with your external genitalia for days at a time. The warm, nutrient-rich environment of menstrual blood creates ideal conditions for rapid bacterial multiplication, transforming your monthly cycle into a recurring episode of bacterial exposure. The puerperal fever that claims so many Victorian women during and after childbirth often begins with the chronic infections established through poor menstrual hygiene practices. Your reproductive system, repeatedly exposed to dangerous bacteria through contaminated menstrual cloths, develops chronic inflammation that weakens your body's natural defences, when pregnancy and childbirth place additional stress on your already compromised system. The established bacterial colonies explode into life-threatening infections that Victorian medicine cannot identify or treat effectively. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates among Victorian women resulted more from inadequate medical care or from the dangerous hygiene practices that society imposed through ignorance and fame. But the evidence suggests that menstrual management played a crucial role in female mortality statistics. The very practices that women used to maintain privacy and dignity during menstruation became pathways for potentially fatal infections. The bacterial contamination in your menstrual cloths doesn't limit itself to your reproductive system. The infected rags, stored in your clothing drawer between uses, contaminate other garments and personal items with dangerous pathogens. Your undergarments, nightgowns, and even your bedding become repositories for the same bacteria that threaten your reproductive health, creating a constellation of infection sources throughout your personal environment. Your skin develops chronic irritation and open sores where the infected menstrual cloths chafe against your thighs and external genitalia. These wounds provide direct pathways for bacterial entry into your bloodstream, bypassing your body's natural defences and allowing dangerous microorganisms to reach your vital organs. The persistent rash and discomfort you experience during menstruation are not natural consequences of your cycle. They are symptoms of ongoing bacterial assault from contaminated fabric. The washing process for menstrual cloths, performed secretly to avoid family embarrassment, often takes place in basins and containers that become contaminated with dangerous bacteria. The water used for this washing frequently comes from the same sources that supply your household's drinking and cooking needs, creating pathways for waterborne disease transmission that affect your entire family. Your attempts to maintain menstrual hygiene actually spread contamination throughout your domestic environment. The lye soap used to clean menstrual cloths, while effective at removing visible stains, cannot eliminate the bacterial biofilms that form in fabric fibres during prolonged contact with blood and tissue. These microscopic bacterial communities, protected by their own secreted matrices, resist conventional cleaning methods and provide reservoirs of infection that persist through multiple washing cycles. Each time you reuse a supposedly clean menstrual cloth, you're reintroducing established bacterial colonies to your most vulnerable anatomy. Your immune system, already compromised by corset-wearing, toxic cosmetics, and patent medicine poisoning, struggles to combat the recurring bacterial challenges presented by contaminated menstrual hygiene practices. The chronic low-level infections that result from poor menstrual care create a state of persistent immune activation that leaves you vulnerable to more serious diseases. Your body's defensive resources, constantly deployed against menstrual-related infections, cannot respond effectively when faced with epidemic diseases like cholera or typhus. The secrecy surrounding menstrual pregnancies prevents the development of improved hygiene techniques that could save lives. Victorian women were forbidden from discussing bodily functions even with their own daughters, perpetuate dangerous practices through ignorance and shame. The knowledge that could prevent infections and deaths remains locked away behind social taboos that prioritize modesty over survival. The chronic pelvic infections that develop from poor menstrual hygiene create persistent pain and discomfort that Victorian medicine attributes to female hysteria or moral weakness. The actual bacterial causes of your suffering remain undiagnosed and untreated, allowing infections to progress from simple contamination to life-threatening sepsis. The ascending infections that begin with contaminated menstrual cloths can ultimately reach your fallopian tubes, ovaries, and abdominal cavity, creating widespread peritonitis that kills with shocking efficiency. Your reproductive future becomes compromised by the bacterial scarring that results from chronic menstrual-related infections, the fallopian tubes, damaged by recurring episodes of bacterial inflammation, develop blockages that prevent conception, or create ectopic pregnancies that threaten your life. Victorian families, desperate for children, never understand that their fertility problems often stem from the dangerous menstrual hygiene practices that society imposes on women. The most tragic aspect of menstrual-related mortality is how preventable these deaths would be with basic understanding of bacterial contamination and proper hygiene techniques. The simple act of using fresh, properly sanitized materials during menstruation could eliminate most of the infections that claim Victorian women's lives, but social shame and medical ignorance combine to maintain practices that transform natural biological processes into deadly threats. Your monthly cycle, already burdened with social stigma and physical discomfort, becomes a recurring dance with death as contaminated menstrual cloths deliver bacterial payloads capable of causing septic shock and organ failure. The privacy and discretion that Victorian society demands during menstruation create perfect conditions for the spread of deadly infections that remain invisible until they've progressed beyond treatment. You lean forward to apply a fresh layer of powder from the communal compact that has passed between 6 women this evening, completely unaware that you're about to press tuberculosis bacteria directly into the pores of your skin. The shared cosmetics that circulate through Victorian drawing rooms and powder rooms carry more than just the residue of previous users. They harbour deadly pathogens that transform the simple act of touching up your appearance into a potentially fatal encounter with infectious disease. Your vanity table, arranged with borrowed rouge pots, shared powder compacts, and communal lip preparations, has become a disease distribution centre disguised as the height of fashionable convenience. The powder compact you're using belonged to Margaret until last week, when her persistent cough finally forced her to take to her bed with what the doctor diplomatically called lung fever. The rouge still bears the invisible imprint of her infected breath, expelled in tiny droplets every time she opened the compact to check her appearance. The tuberculosis bacteria, remarkably hardy and capable of surviving for weeks in the dry environment of face powder, lie waiting in the cosmetic dust like dormant seeds ready to bloom into deadly infection at the first contact with your mucous membranes. Victorian social customs surrounding cosmetics create perfect conditions for disease transmission between women of all social classes. The intimate nature of sharing powder puffs, rouge brushes, and lip preparations means that infections pass directly from the most sensitive areas of one woman's face to another's, bypassing many of the natural barriers that might prevent casual transmission of disease. When you dab the infected powder puff across your lips and nose, you're inoculating yourself with whatever respiratory infections the previous users have contributed to the communal cosmetic supply. The consumption that plagues so many Victorian women spreads with particular efficiency through shared cosmetics, because the disease's primary symptom, the persistent cough and bloody sputum, deposit infectious material directly onto the tools and preparations used around the face and mouth. Your borrowed lip rouge becomes a concentrated repository of tubercle bacilli, while the shared powder puff acts as an efficient delivery system for respiratory pathogens. Each application of communal cosmetics provides multiple opportunities for bacterial transmission, turning routine beauty maintenance into a form of Russian roulette with infectious disease. The warm, moist environment of the powder room creates ideal conditions for bacterial multiplication in shared cosmetics. The compact mirrors, repeatedly breathed upon as women lean close to check their reflections, become coated with respiratory droplets that dry into invisible films of infectious material. The rouge pots, warmed by gaslighting and humid from countless exhalations, provide perfect incubation conditions for the growth of dangerous bacteria that thrive in the organic compounds found in Victorian cosmetics. Historians still argue whether Victorian women understood the health risks of sharing personal care items, or simply prioritise social bonding and economic convenience over individual safety. But the evidence suggests that communal cosmetic practices contributed significantly to the spread of respiratory diseases among the upper classes who could afford such luxuries. The kohl pencils that pass from woman to woman carry their own collection of eye infections and bacterial contaminations. The soft, waxy composition of Victorian eye cosmetics provides an excellent medium for bacterial growth, while the practice of sharing these intimate preparations ensures rapid transmission of conjunctivitis, styes, and more serious eye infections. Your borrowed kohl, used by 3 different women at tonight's dinner party, carries Staphylococcus bacteria that will cause the painful eye infection you'll develop within days, along with Streptococcus organisms capable of causing more systemic illness. The scarlet fever that periodically devastates Victorian households often spreads through shared cosmetics that carry Streptococcus bacteria from infected users to healthy women. The bacteria, deposited in lip rouge through the breath and saliva of infected users, remain viable for days in the moist environment of cosmetic preparations. When you apply the contaminated rouge to your own lips, you're painting your mouth with a bacterial culture capable of causing the throat infections that lead to scarlet fever's characteristic rash and potentially fatal complications. Your skin reacts to bacterial contamination in shared cosmetics by developing the chronic rashes and mysterious eruptions that Victorian women accept as natural consequences of using beauty preparations. The persistent acne, recurring boils, and spreading skin infections that plague fashionable women aren't caused by moral failings or dietary indiscretions. They are direct results of applying contaminated cosmetics that introduce dangerous bacteria to facial skin already sensitized by harsh chemical treatments. The communal face powder becomes a particularly effective vector for spreading respiratory infections because the fine particles, contaminated with dried sputum and exhaled bacteria, become airborne each time the compact is opened. The women gathered around shared cosmetics inhale clouds of infectious powder dust, ensuring that respiratory pathogens reach deep into their lungs where they can establish the infections that will claim so many Victorian lives. The powder room becomes a gas chamber of sorts, filled with invisible bacterial aerosols that guarantee widespread infection among its users. The sharing of cosmetics extends beyond immediate social gatherings to create networks of infection that span entire communities. The rouge pot borrowed from your sister carries infections from her household to yours, while the powder compact you lend to your neighbour introduces your family's pathogens to her domestic environment. Victorian society's emphasis on mutual aid and social sharing transforms individual infections into community epidemics as contaminated cosmetics circulate through interconnected networks of friends and relatives. The bacterial contamination in shared cosmetics often combines with the toxic effects of arsenic and mercury, in Victorian beauty preparations to create particularly devastating health consequences. Your immune system, already compromised by chronic heavy metal poisoning from your daily cosmetic routine, cannot effectively combat the bacterial infections introduced through communal beauty practices. The combination of toxic cosmetics and infectious contamination creates a perfect storm of health destruction that claims lives with shocking efficiency. The lipstick and lip preparations that pass between women carry not only respiratory bacteria, but also the viruses responsible for cold sores and other oral infections. The herpes simplex virus, perfectly adapted for transmission through direct contact with infected surfaces, spreads rapidly through shared lip cosmetics, causing the painful mouth sores that Victorian women attribute to stress or dietary indiscretions, rather than recognizing as symptoms of viral infection transmitted through communal beauty practices. Your borrowed compact mirror, repeatedly breathed upon by infected users, becomes coated with dried respiratory secretions that contain viable bacteria and viruses capable of causing serious illness. Each time you lean close to check your reflection, you inhale the concentrated pathogens deposited by previous users, ensuring exposure to whatever respiratory infections have been circulating through your social circle. The mirror, designed to reflect your beauty, actually reflects back the infectious diseases of everyone who has used it before you. The most insidious aspect of cosmetic-related disease transmission is how it masquerades as social bonding and feminine camaraderie. The act of sharing beauty preparations, seen as evidence of friendship and trust, becomes a mechanism for spreading deadly infections that can destroy entire social networks. Victorian women, seeking to enhance their appearance and strengthen their relationships through communal beauty rituals, unknowingly participate in disease transmission patterns that claim thousands of lives while maintaining the appearance of refined social interaction. The powder room plague spread silently through Victorian society, carried by the very cosmetics that promise to enhance beauty and social status, transforming shared vanity into shared mortality with each application of contaminated powder and each stroke of infected rouge. You kneel in your kitchen garden, carefully tending the lettuce and herbs that will grace your family's dinner table tonight, completely unaware that the rich, dark soil beneath your hands contains enough human waste to poison every person in your neighbourhood. The Victorian practice of fertilizing food gardens with fresh human excrement, euphemistically called night soil, transforms your carefully cultivated vegetables into vehicles for deadly diseases that will soon devastate your household. Your pride in growing your own food becomes a source of horror as dysentery, typhoid, and cholera bacteria flourish in the contaminated earth that nourishes your family's meals. The night soil man visits your property weekly, emptying the contents of your household's cesspits directly onto the garden beds where you grow the vegetables that feed your children. Victorian agricultural wisdom insists that human waste makes the finest fertilizer, producing the largest and most flavorful crops, but this practice creates a direct pipeline from your family's intestines to your dinner plates. The bacteria that cause typhoid fever thrive in the nutrient-rich environment of human waste, multiplying exponentially in the soil before taking up residence in the roots and leaves of your carefully tended vegetables. The lettuce you harvest for tonight's salad carries invisible passengers that will transform your elegant dinner party into a breeding ground for infectious disease. Each leaf, grown in soil, enriched with the waste of dozens of households, harbours millions of bacteria capable of causing violent diarrhea, high fever, and death. The Salmonella and Shigella bacteria that cause dysentery find the moist environment of fresh lettuce leaves ideal for survival, remaining viable from garden to table despite your careful washing in contaminated well water. Your prized tomatoes, swollen with juice and fertilised with the concentrated waste of your neighbourhood, contain enough typhoid bacteria to infect an entire regiment. Salmonella typhi, the organism responsible for typhoid fever, has colonised every part of the plant from roots to fruit, creating vegetables that function as bacterial weapons disguised as wholesome food. When you slice these contaminated tomatoes for your family's meal, you're preparing a dish seasoned with infectious agents that will cause the mysterious fevers and deaths that plague Victorian households throughout the growing season. The herbs you gather for cooking, parsley, sage, and thyme grown in beds richly fertilised with human excrement, carry their own deadly cargo of intestinal parasites and bacterial infections. The eggs of roundworms and tapeworms, passed in human waste and deposited in your garden soil, contaminate every sprig of herbs you use to flavour your cooking. These parasites, ingested with your carefully prepared meals, establish colonies in your family's intestines that cause chronic malnutrition, digestive problems, and the wasting diseases that Victorian medicine cannot explain or treat. The root vegetables you serve with such pride, carrots, turnips, and potatoes grown in soil enriched with fresh sewage, concentrate bacterial contamination in their edible portions. The bacteria that cause cholera and dysentery don't just coat the surface of these vegetables, they penetrate deep into the plant tissue, making thorough cleaning impossible. Your family's favourite roasted vegetables become delivery systems for infectious diseases that will claim lives with the efficiency of biological warfare. Historians still argue whether Victorian gardening practices reflected genuine ignorance about disease transmission or simply prioritised agricultural productivity over public health. But the death tolls from foodborne illnesses during harvest seasons suggest that contaminated gardens served as major sources of epidemic disease throughout urban areas. The water you use to wash your contaminated vegetables comes from the same wells that are polluted by the cesspit contents used to fertilise your garden, creating a closed loop of contamination that ensures maximum bacterial concentration in everything your family consumes. The clean water actually adds additional layers of contamination to vegetables already saturated with dangerous pathogens, guaranteeing that even your most careful food preparation cannot eliminate the health threats lurking in every meal. Your children, who love to help with garden work and often sample vegetables directly from the plants, receive concentrated doses of bacterial infection that their developing immune systems cannot combat. The dysentery that strikes your household repeatedly throughout the growing season doesn't result from poor hygiene or moral failings. It comes directly from the contaminated soil that produces your food. Victorian families often lose multiple children to what they call summer complaint, never understanding that their gardening practices are directly responsible for these deaths. The bacterial contamination in your garden extends far beyond the vegetables you harvest. The soil itself becomes a reservoir of infectious disease that contaminates everything it touches. Your clothing to hook and tools and hands carry dangerous pathogens from the garden back into your house, spreading contamination throughout your domestic environment. The mud you track indoors on your shoes contains enough bacteria to sicken your entire household, transforming your home's floors into bacterial cultures that threaten everyone who lives there. The flies that swarm around your fertilised garden beds serve as efficient vectors for spreading disease from your contaminated soil to your kitchen and dining areas. These insects, attracted by the rich organic matter in your night soil in rigid beds, land on fresh waste before flying directly to your food preparation surfaces. They deposit bacterial contamination on every surface they touch, ensuring that even foods not grown in your garden become contaminated with the same pathogens that flourish in your fertilized soil. The typhoid fever that periodically devastates your neighborhood often originates in gardens like yours, where human waste fertilization creates ideal conditions for bacterial multiplication and transmission. Mary, your cook, develops what appears to be a mild fever after preparing salad with your contaminated lettuce, but she actually becomes a typhoid carrier capable of spreading the disease to everyone she serves. Victorian households often experience waves of mysterious illness that correlate with harvest seasons, never recognizing the connection between their gardening practices and their family's health crises. The dysentery that strikes your dinner guests within hours of their meal doesn't result from bad meat or spoiled dairy products. It comes from the contaminated vegetables that seemed so fresh and wholesome when served. The Shigella bacteria that colonized your lettuce and herbs in the sewage-enriched soil cause violent intestinal infections that can kill within days. Your elegant dinner party becomes a disease distribution event, sending infected guests home to spread dysentery throughout their own households and social circles. The parasitic worms that infest your family's intestines come directly from the contaminated soil where you grow your food. The eggs of these parasites, deposited in your garden through night soil fertilization, remain viable in the soil for months before contaminating the vegetables you harvest for your table. Your family's chronic digestive problems, anemia, and failure to thrive result from the colonies of intestinal parasites that feast on their internal organs, all delivered through the wholesome vegetables you grow with such care and pride. Your beautiful kitchen garden, with its neat rows of thriving vegetables and aromatic herbs, conceals a deadly secret beneath its fertile surface. The night soil that creates such abundant harvests also ensures that every meal becomes a potential death sentence, transforming the act of feeding your family into an exercise in biological Russian roulette. The contaminated earth that nourishes your plants with human waste creates a cycle of infection that turns your dinner table into ground zero for epidemic diseases that will echo through generations of Victorian families. You carefully fold the heavy black crepe mourning dress that attended Mrs. Henderson's funeral last week, preparing to wear it again for today's service, honouring young Timothy, never suspecting that this garment carries the infectious remnants of everyone who has died while wearing similar attire. The elaborate mourning costume that Victorian society demands becomes a mobile repository for the diseases of the dead, passed from corpse to mourner through the ritual exchange of funeral garments that spreads death among the living with methodical efficiency. Your mourning wardrobe, meant to honour the deceased, becomes a collection of contaminated fabric that ensures the epidemics claiming Victorian lives continue their deadly march through grieving communities. The mourning dress you're preparing to wear has already attended 17 funerals this year, moving from household to household as families share the expensive crepe and bombazine garments required for proper grief observance. Each wearing adds new layers of contamination as the fabric absorbs infectious particles from different corpses. Mourning families and funeral venues, the dress carries microscopic samples of every disease that has claimed lives in your community, creating a textile museum of death that spreads its collection to each new wearer. Victorian funeral customs ensure maximum contact between mourning garments and infectious material. You spend hours in close proximity to the corpse, the heavy fabric of your dress brushing against contaminated surfaces while you maintain your vigil beside the deceased. The tuberculosis bacteria that killed Mrs. Henderson continue to live in her exhaled breath, still escaping from her lungs hours after death, settling into the porous weave of your mourning attire. The dress absorbs these infectious particles like a sponge, trapping deadly pathogens in its dense black fibres. The scarlet fever that claimed little Annie spreads efficiently through the mourning clothes worn at her funeral, as family members and friends share contaminated garments that carry streptococcus bacteria from the deceased child to adult mourners. The bacteria that killed Annie find the warm, or moist environment inside your mourning dress ideal for survival and multiplication when you next wear this contaminated garment. The bacteria transfer to your skin through the inevitable perspiration and friction of extended wear during lengthy funeral services. The practice of laying out the dead in family homes creates concentrated contamination in mourning garments as infectious diseases continue their work even after clinical death. The smallpox virus that killed your neighbour remains active in the pustules covering her corpse, releasing infectious particles that settle into every surface of the room, including the mourning clothes of everyone who comes to pay their respects. Your black silk dress becomes impregnated with viral particles that will remain viable for months, waiting for the next funeral to claim new victims. Historians still argue whether Victorian families understood that diseases remained infectious after death or simply prioritised social obligations over health concerns. But the correlation between funeral attendance and subsequent illness outbreaks suggests that mourning garments served as efficient vectors for disease transmission between households and across social boundaries. The cholera that devastated the Patterson family spreads through the community via the mourning clothes shared among neighbours who cannot afford individual funeral wardrobes. The Vibrio bacteria that caused the original deaths thrive in the moisture retained by heavy mourning fabrics, creating bacterial colonies that multiply with each wearing. The dress that honoured Mr. Patterson's death becomes the instrument that spreads his disease to the next family, continuing the cycle of infection and mourning that characterises cholera epidemics. Your mourning veil, worn by dozens of grieving women, carries respiratory infections from face to face with deadly efficiency. The fine mesh fabric traps exhaled bacteria and viruses while allowing them to remain close to your breathing passages for hours at a time. The tuberculosis, diphtheria, and influenza bacteria collected from previous wearers create a concentrated atmosphere of infection around your head and throat, ensuring maximum exposure to whatever respiratory diseases have claimed lives in your community. The mourning jewellery and accessories that accompany funeral attire carry their own infectious cargo. The jet beads and black ribbons, handled by countless mourners, and often in direct contact with corpses during viewing rituals, harbour bacteria and viruses that survive for extended periods on non-porous surfaces. Your borrowed mourning brooch, which adorned Mrs. Whitmore's dress during her final illness, carries staphylococcus bacteria that will cause the skin infection developing around the pin's attachment point. The funeral parlours and churches where mourning garments congregate become epicentres for disease transmission as contaminated clothing from multiple families mingles in confined spaces. The air in these venues becomes saturated with infectious particles released from dozens of contaminated mourning outfits, creating atmospheric conditions that guarantee exposure to multiple diseases simultaneously. Your mourning attire doesn't just carry infections from the specific deceased person being honoured, It collects pathogens from every other contaminated garment present at the service. The typhoid fever that killed the Baker family spreads through your community via the mourning clothes worn at their mass funeral. The salmonella bacteria that caused their deaths find the organic dyes and sizing agents in Victorian mourning fabrics ideal for extended survival. The dress you wear to honour their memory becomes contaminated with the same bacterial strains that killed them, ensuring that their deaths contribute to future epidemics as the contaminated garment continues its circulation through grieving households. The children's mourning clothes create particularly tragic vectors for disease transmission as smaller garments, more frequently shared among families with limited resources, carry concentrated loads of infectious material between households with vulnerable populations. The little black dress that honoured baby Margaret's death carries the diphtheria bacteria that killed her directly to the next family's infant, creating chains of child mortality that devastate entire neighbourhoods during epidemic seasons. The elaborate cleaning rituals performed on mourning garments between funerals prove woefully inadequate against the bacterial and viral loads they carry. The brushing, airing, and perfuming that Victorian families believe sufficient for garment maintenance cannot eliminate the deeply embedded pathogens that have colonised the fabric's fibres. The infectious agents survive these cleaning attempts and multiply during storage, ensuring that each subsequent wearing delivers fresh bacterial assaults to new victims. The mourning customs that require extended wearing of funeral attire create prolonged exposure periods that guarantee infection in susceptible individuals. You spend entire days in contaminated mourning dress, allowing bacterial and viral particles trapped in the fabric to find entry points through minor skin abrasions, respiratory passages, and mucous membranes. The length of Victorian funeral observances transforms single exposures into sustained bacterial assaults that overwhelm even healthy immune systems. The social pressure to maintain appropriate mourning appearance prevents families from discarding contaminated garments that could save lives if removed from circulation. The economic necessity of sharing expensive mourning attire ensures that infectious diseases continue their spread through communities that cannot afford the luxury of individual funeral wardrobes. Victorian society's emphasis on proper grief observance creates conditions that transform mourning into a mechanism for perpetuating the very deaths being mourned. Your mourning wardrobe becomes a catalogue of community mortality, each garment carrying the infectious signature of different families' tragedies while preparing to add new victims to the growing list of epidemic casualties. The black fabric that symbolises respect for the dead becomes the instrument that ensures more deaths will follow, creating endless cycles of infection and mourning that define the Victorian experience with epidemic disease. You bite into a piece of crystallised ginger, savouring the sweetness that temporarily masks the constant throbbing in your rotted teeth, completely unaware that the abscess forming beneath your left molar will kill you within the month. Victorian society's obsession with sugar-laden treats, combined with complete ignorance of dental hygiene, creates perfect conditions for oral infections that claim more women's lives than childbirth complications. Your mouth has become a festering breeding ground for deadly bacteria that will soon enter your bloodstream and spread throughout your body, turning your love of confections into a death sentence delivered one sweet bite at a time. The sugar that dominates your daily diet feeds the Streptococcus mutant bacteria that colonize your teeth with the efficiency of an invading army. Each bonbon, each spoonful of jam, each delicate pastry provides fuel for bacterial multiplication that produces acid waste products capable of dissolving tooth enamel faster than your body can repair the damage. Your teeth, already weakened by the arsenic and mercury in your cosmetics and medicines, cannot withstand the constant bacterial assault that sugar consumption unleashes in your mouth. The toothache that has plagued you for weeks isn't simply dental discomfort. It's evidence that bacteria have invaded the pulp chamber of your tooth and established an infection that will soon spread to your jawbone and beyond. The Streptococcus bacteria that began by feeding on sugar residue in your mouth have now colonized the living tissue inside your tooth, creating an abscess filled with millions of infectious organisms just inches from your brain. Victorian dentistry, primitive and often more dangerous than the conditions it attempts to treat, cannot address infections that have progressed beyond the tooth surface. Your daily routine of consuming tea with multiple lumps of sugar, followed by an assortment of candied fruits and chocolate confections, creates ideal conditions for rapid bacterial multiplication in your oral cavity. The bacteria that cause tooth decay thrive in the constantly sugar-rich environment of your mouth, producing acidic waste that dissolves your teeth from within, while creating the perfect pH conditions for even more dangerous bacterial strains to establish residence. The dental abscess growing beneath your infected tooth creates a pocket of pus that contains concentrated colonies of Streptococcus bacteria capable of causing life-threatening systemic infections. These bacteria, originally confined to your oral cavity, begin to migrate through your bloodstream each time you chew or brush your teeth, carrying their infectious payload to your heart, brain, and other vital organs. And the endocarditis that will eventually kill you begins with bacterial colonies that originated in your sugar-damaged teeth. Historians still argue whether Victorian families understood the connection between sugar consumption and dental decay, or simply prioritized social customs and pleasure over health concerns. But the epidemic of dental disease among the upper classes who could afford sugar-rich diets suggests that sweet consumption patterns directly correlated with mortality rates from oral infections. Your gums, inflamed and bleeding from chronic bacterial infection, provide highways for dangerous microorganisms to enter your circulatory system. The gingivitis that makes your mouth constantly sore and your breath perpetually foul isn't just a cosmetic problem. It's evidence of systemic bacterial infection that threatens your life with each passing day. The bleeding gums that stain your handkerchiefs pink serve as open wounds through which oral bacteria gain direct access to your bloodstream. The periodontal disease that loosens your teeth creates deep pockets of infection around your tooth roots, harbouring anaerobic bacteria that thrive without oxygen and produce toxins capable of destroying bone and soft tissue. Your jawbone, under constant bacterial assault from infected tooth sockets, begins to deteriorate in a process called osteomyelitis that can spread to your skull and brain. The chronic jaw pain you experience isn't muscular tension. It's evidence that bacteria are literally eating away at the bones of your face. The primitive dental treatments available in Victorian times often worsen infections rather than curing them. The tooth extractions performed without anaesthesia or antiseptic precautions introduce additional bacteria into your already infected mouth, while creating new wounds that serve as bacterial entry points. The dental instruments, used on multiple patients without sterilization, carry infections from other people's mouths directly into your open dental wounds. Your breath, heavy with the smell of decay and bacterial waste products, signals the presence of volatile sulfur compounds produced by the anaerobic bacteria colonizing your infected teeth and gums. these same bacteria produce toxins that damage your heart valves, creating the cardiac complications that will ultimately cause your death. The bad breath that embarrasses you in social situations is actually evidence of bacterial processes that are slowly poisoning your entire body. The sugar-damaged teeth in your mouth become reservoirs for systemic diseases that spread throughout your body via your bloodstream. The bacteria that established colonies in your dental decay migrate to your heart, causing infective endocarditis that destroys your cardiac valves. The same bacterial strains travel to your brain, creating abscesses that cause the headaches and confusion you've been experiencing. Your infected teeth serve as bacterial launching pads for invasions that target your most vital organs. The constant swallowing of infected saliva from your diseased mouth introduces dangerous bacteria directly into your digestive system, causing chronic stomach problems and intestinal infections that compound your overall health decline. The Streptococcus bacteria that originated in your tooth decay colonize your throat and stomach, creating secondary infection sites that contribute to your body's total bacterial load. Your immune system, already overwhelmed by the constant demands of fighting chronic oral infections, cannot respond effectively to other health threats. The energy your body expends battling the bacteria in your mouth leaves you vulnerable to epidemic diseases that claim victims whose immune systems are compromised by existing health problems. The respiratory infections that seem to linger in your household find easy targets in family members whose bodies are already fighting losing battles against dental bacteria. The facial swelling that has begun around your infected tooth indicates that the bacterial infection has spread beyond your tooth root into the soft tissues of your face and neck. This cellulitis, caused by the same Streptococcus bacteria that started with sugar-fed tooth decay, can quickly progress to necrotizing fasciitis, a flesh-eating bacterial infection that destroys tissue faster than medical treatment can address it. Victorian medicine has no effective treatments for these advanced bacterial infections. The fever that accompanies your dental pain signals that bacteria from your infected tooth have entered your bloodstream in sufficient quantities to trigger your body's systemic immune response. This bacteremia, or blood poisoning, indicates that your oral infection has progressed beyond local dental problems to become a life-threatening systemic disease. The bacteria circulating in your bloodstream will soon establish secondary infections in your heart, brain, and other organs that cannot survive bacterial colonization. Your love of sweet treats, encouraged by Victorian social customs and dietary preferences, has transformed your mouth into a bacterial weapons factory that produces the infectious agents responsible for your declining health. Each sugar cube dissolved in your tea, each piece of candy savoured during social calls, feeds the bacterial colonies that will ultimately end your life through the systemic infections that begin in your rotted teeth. The dental decay that started as small cavities in your sugar-damaged teeth has progressed to life-threatening abscesses that serve as bacterial reservoirs capable of seeding deadly infections throughout your body, proving that Victorian sweetness carries a bitter price measured in suffering and premature death. You ring the bell for your housemaid, completely unaware that the woman who will serve your afternoon tea has been living with typhus for 3 weeks, her unwashed body teeming with infected lice that are about to transform your elegant drawing room into ground zero for an epidemic that will decimate your household. The rigid class structure of Victorian society creates perfect conditions for disease transmission as servants, forced to work despite illness and living in squalid conditions that breed infection, become unwitting biological weapons that spread deadly diseases throughout the households they serve. Your domestic staff, essential for maintaining your refined lifestyle, become the vectors through which the diseases of poverty infiltrate the supposedly protected world of upper-class Victorian society. The typhus bacteria that multiply in the intestines of your housemaid's body lice represent one of history's most efficient disease delivery systems, passed from servant to employer through the countless intimate contacts required by Victorian domestic arrangements. Each time she handles your clothing, prepares your food, or cleans your living spaces, she deposits infected lice and their contaminated feces throughout your environment. The bacteria that cause epidemic typhus can survive for weeks in dried louse droppings, creating reservoirs of infection that persist long after the initial contamination occurs. Your cook, suffering from what she believes is simple stomach trouble, continues preparing your family's meals while shedding typhoid bacteria in her feces and contaminating every surface she touches. The Salmonella typhi organisms that colonize her intestinal tract don't incapacitate her completely. They create a chronic carrier state that allows her to function normally while spreading deadly infection to everyone who consumes food prepared by her contaminated hands. Victorian employment practices, which provide no sick leave or medical care for domestic workers, ensure that infected servants continue working until their disease is spread throughout the households they serve. The overcrowded servants' quarters in your basement create ideal conditions for disease transmission among your domestic staff, guaranteeing that infections spread rapidly through the entire household workforce before manifesting in your family's living spaces. The close sleeping arrangements, inadequate ventilation, and poor sanitation in servants' areas transform these spaces into bacterial incubators that amplify and concentrate diseases before distributing them throughout your home. The cholera that strikes your scullery maid spreads to the rest of your staff within days, each infected servant carrying the disease upstairs to contaminate your family's environment. Your lady's maid, who handles your most intimate garments and personal items, carries streptococcus bacteria from the infected wounds on her hands directly to your clothing and cosmetics. The skin infections that plague servants, caused by poor nutrition and harsh working conditions, create open wounds that harbour dangerous bacteria capable of causing life-threatening infections in their employers. Each time she fastens your corset or arranges your hair, she transfers bacterial contamination from her infected hands to your most vulnerable areas. Historians still argue whether Victorian employers genuinely didn't understand how servant living conditions affected household health, or simply prioritised economic convenience over disease prevention. But the evidence suggests that many upper-class families died from diseases that originated in their own servants' quarters and could have been prevented through basic improvements to staff working and living conditions. The tuberculosis that consumes your parlourmaid spreads through your house via the respiratory droplets she expels while dusting, cleaning and serving meals. The bacteria that multiply in her diseased lungs become airborne each time she coughs or speaks, settling onto surfaces throughout your home and creating contaminated environments that ensure family-wide exposure to the infection. Victorian households often experience waves of mysterious respiratory illnesses that correlate directly with the progression of tuberculosis among domestic staff members. Your children's nursemaid, infected with diphtheria but showing only mild throat irritation, spreads the deadly bacteria to your most vulnerable family members through the constant close contact required for childcare. Thus, the Corynebacterium diphtheriae organisms that colonize her throat transfer to your children through shared utensils, contaminated hands, and the intimate physical contact involved in dressing, feeding, and caring for young ones. The bacterial membrane that will eventually suffocate your children begins growing in their throats with bacteria delivered by their seemingly healthy caregiver. The washing and cleaning activities performed by infected servants create widespread contamination throughout your household as bacteria from their bodies transfer to every surface they touch. Your laundress, suffering from cholera-related diarrhea that she attributes to dietary indiscretion, contaminates your family's clothing and bedding with Vibrio bacteria that survive the inadequate washing processes of Victorian domestic management. The clean linens that emerge from your wash house carry concentrated loads of infectious bacteria that guarantee family-wide exposure to waterborne diseases. The chamber pot emptying and waste disposal duties performed by your housemaids create direct pathways for fecal-oral disease transmission as infected servants handle contaminated materials before preparing food and caring for family members. The dysentery bacteria that multiply in your maid's intestines spread throughout your household via the countless surfaces she contaminates while managing waste disposal and then performing cooking and cleaning duties without adequate hand washing or sanitation measures. Your personal servant's chronic cough, which she politely covers with her hand during your morning toilette routine, deposits tuberculosis bacteria directly onto your hairbrushes, cosmetics, and clothing while she assists with your daily grooming. The infected droplets that coat these personal items create concentrated sources of bacterial contamination that ensure maximum exposure during your most intimate daily activities. The consumption that will eventually claim your life enters your body through the very cosmetics and grooming tools that your infected servant handles each morning. The food preparation duties performed by infected kitchen staff create multiple pathways for disease transmission as bacterial contamination enters your family's diet through contaminated hands, utensils, and preparation surfaces. Your infected cook's habit of tasting food while preparing meals introduces her saliva-borne bacteria into every dish she boils, while her contaminated hands leave bacterial deposits on serving utensils and dinnerware that carry infection directly to your family's mouths. The close physical contact required for Victorian domestic service ensures maximum opportunities for disease transmission between infected servants and their employers. Your lady's maid, who dresses and undresses you daily, carries skin infections directly to your body through contaminated fabric and personal contact. The streptococcus bacteria that colonize her infected hands transfer to your skin through the countless touches required for corseting, hair arrangement, and clothing maintenance. The economic desperation that forces servants to work despite serious illness creates household disease bombs that explode without warning when infected workers finally collapse from diseases they've been spreading for weeks. Your housemaid's sudden death from typhus reveals that she's been contaminating your environment with infected lice and bacteria throughout her final illness, ensuring that every member of your household has been exposed to the disease that killed her. The servant stairways and passages that connect different areas of your house become contaminated highways for disease transmission as infected staff members carry bacterial loads from their quarters to your family's living spaces. The typhoid bacteria that multiply in your servants' contaminated living areas travel upstairs on their bodies and belongings, creating infection pathways that breach the supposed barriers between upper and lower class living spaces. Your domestic staff, essential for maintaining the lifestyle that defines Victorian respectability, become unwitting agents of biological warfare that deliver the diseases of poverty directly into the heart of upper-class households, proving that no amount of wealth or social status can protect against the bacterial democracy of infectious disease when servants and employers share the same domestic environment. You stand before your wash basins, staring at the clear water with genuine terror, convinced that immersing your body will invite pneumonia, consumption, and moral corruption into your very soul. Victorian medical wisdom has taught you that water opens the pores to disease, weakens the constitution, and disturbs the natural balance of humours that keep you healthy, so you haven't taken a proper bath in over 6 months. Your fear of water, reinforced by decades of medical misinformation and social conditioning, transforms your unwashed body into a living laboratory for bacterial cultivation, where every fold of skin becomes a breeding ground for infections that will soon consume you from the outside in. The layer of grime that coats your skin, like a second epidermis, provides perfect nutrition for the bacteria that colonize your unwashed body with the dedication of microscopic farmers. Staphylococcus and streptococcus organisms thrive in the accumulated sweat, dead skin cells, and environmental dirt that cake your flesh, creating bacterial communities so dense that your skin becomes more microbe than human tissue. These bacterial colonies produce waste products that create the persistent rash covering your torso, while their metabolic activities generate the nauseating odour that follows you through every room of your house. The sebaceous cysts that bulge beneath your unwashed skin result from months of accumulated oils and bacteria that block your pores and create perfect environments for anaerobic bacterial growth. These infected lumps, scattered across your back and shoulders like a constellation of disease, contain concentrated cultures of flesh-eating bacteria that will eventually rupture and spread their infectious contents across wide areas of your body. Victorian medicine attributes these growths to moral failings or dietary indiscretions, never recognizing them as direct consequences of prolonged bathing avoidance. Your scalp, hidden beneath months of accumulated pomade and styling products, harbours parasitic colonies that have transformed your hair into a writhing ecosystem of lice, mites, and bacteria, the seborrheic dermatitis that makes your head constantly itch, results from fungal overgrowth in the nutrient-rich environment created by unwashed hair and scalp oils. The yellow crusts that flake from your scalp aren't dandruff. They're infected biofilms created by bacterial communities that feed on the organic matter accumulating in your unwashed locks. The skin between your toes, perpetually moist from perspiration trapped in tight shoes and never cleaned, develops the fungal infections that Victorian women politely ignore, while the organisms literally digest their flesh. The athlete's foot fungus that colonizes your feet spreads upward along your legs, creating the mysterious skin conditions that puzzle your physician and resist every topical treatment he prescribes. The bacterial secondary infections that develop in the cracks and fissures created by fungal damage provide entry points for more serious systemic infections. Historians still argue whether Victorian bathing phobias resulted from legitimate concerns about water quality and heating systems, or from medical misinformation that elevated hygiene avoidance to a matter of health preservation. But the evidence suggests that fear of water contributed more to disease than actual washing ever could. The bacterial vaginosis that creates the persistent discharge staining your undergarments results from the complete disruption of your normal vaginal flora caused by months without proper cleaning. The pathogenic bacteria that colonize your genital area in the absence of basic hygiene create infections that spread upward through your reproductive tract, causing the pelvic inflammatory disease that makes intercourse agonizing and threatens your life with every menstrual cycle. Victorian medicine attributes these gynecological problems to moral weakness rather than recognising them as consequences of inadequate personal hygiene. Your armpits, thick with months of accumulated deodorant powder and sweat, become bacterial rainforests where dangerous microorganisms multiply with tropical enthusiasm. The abscess that's forming beneath your left arm contains enough Streptococcus bacteria to kill you through blood poisoning if it ruptures internally. The chronic lymph node swelling in your armpits isn't evidence of female delicacy. It's your immune system's desperate attempt to contain the bacterial infections that originate in your unwashed skin folds. The skin condition that covers your back and chest with painful boils results from the Staphylococcus bacteria that multiply in the sebum and sweat trapped beneath your unwashed clothing. These furuncles, filled with infectious pus, create new bacterial colonies each time they rupture, spreading infection across wider areas of your body and ensuring that your skin becomes increasingly diseased with each passing month of bathing avoidance. The scarring that results from these infections will permanently disfigure your torso, even if you survive the systemic infections they're creating. Your feet, trapped in shoes for months without proper washing, develop the trench foot conditions that plague soldiers in prolonged combat. The maceration of your skin in the constantly moist environment of unwashed feet creates open wounds that serve as highways for bacterial invasion of your circulatory system. The gangrene that's beginning in your smallest toes will eventually require amputation if the infection doesn't kill you first through blood poisoning. The impetigo that spreads across your face results from the Streptococcus bacteria that multiply in the unwashed cosmetic residue caking your skin. The honey-crusted lesions that make your appearance increasingly frightening contain concentrated cultures of flesh-eating bacteria that spread to new areas of your face with each scratch or touch. Victorian beauty standards, which prize pale complexions achieved through cosmetic application, become impossible to maintain when bacterial infections create the angry red lesions that no amount of powder can conceal. Your clothing, worn for weeks without washing and pressed against your unwashed skin, becomes impregnated with bacterial cultures that create mobile disease distribution systems. The fabric fibers trap pathogenic microorganisms that multiply in the warm and moist environment created by your body heat and perspiration. Each movement spreads bacterial contamination to new areas of your body while distributing infectious particles throughout your environment. The cellulitis that's spreading up your legs from infected foot wounds represents a life-threatening emergency that Victorian medicine cannot address effectively. The Streptococcus bacteria that entered through cracks in your unwashed feet have colonized the deeper layers of your skin and are rapidly spreading through your lymphatic system toward your vital organs. The red streaks extending up your calves mark the pathway these bacteria are following as they advance toward your heart and brain. The psychological toll of your deteriorating hygiene creates additional health problems, as the shame and social isolation resulting from your appearance and odour contribute to the depression that makes basic self-care seem impossible. The cycle of hygiene avoidance and bacterial infection becomes self-perpetuating as your declining mental state makes the prospect of bathing seem even more overwhelming and frightening. The parasitic infestations that flourish in your unwashed environment include not just lice and mites, but also the fleas that carry plague bacteria from the rats attracted to your unwashed household. The bubonic plague bacteria that these fleas introduce through their bites will cause the swollen lymph nodes and high fever that characterize the Black Death, bringing medieval diseases into your Victorian drawing room through the simple mechanism of avoiding water and soap. Your unwashed body has become a walking biological weapon system, distributing dangerous bacteria and parasites to everyone you encounter while serving as a breeding ground for diseases that will eventually overwhelm your immune system and claim your life through the accumulated effects of systematic hygiene neglect that transforms cleanliness, avoidance into a form of slow suicide. You admire your reflection in the full-length mirror, pleased with how your elaborate velvet gown showcases your fashionable silhouette, completely oblivious to the fact that the heavy fabric clinging to your body has become a biological death trap that concentrates and cultivates deadly bacteria with every breath you take. The Victorian obsession with rich, unwashable fabrics creates walking petri dishes of infection as women like yourself spend their days wrapped in materials that trap moisture, heat, and infectious particles while remaining impossible to clean properly. Your beautiful wardrobe has transformed into a collection of bacterial incubators that ensure every social gathering becomes an opportunity for disease transmission on a massive scale. The wool dress you're wearing hasn't been properly cleaned in over a year. Its dense fibres harbouring bacterial colonies that have established permanent residence in the fabric's complex weave. Each day you wear this gown, the bacteria multiply exponentially in the warm, moist environment created by your body heat and perspiration, while the lanolin naturally present in wool provides additional nutrition for microbial growth. The Staphylococcus and Streptococcus organisms living in your dress have created biofilms so sophisticated that they've essentially transformed your clothing into living tissue composed more of bacteria than fabric. The multiple layers of your Victorian ensemble create perfect conditions for anaerobic bacterial growth, as the heavy materials restrict air circulation and trap moisture against your skin for hours at a time. Your chemise, corset cover, corset, bustle, petticoats, and outer dress combine to create a sealed environment where dangerous bacteria thrive without oxygen while producing toxic waste products that poison your system through skin absorption. The elaborate construction of Victorian women's clothing essentially creates a portable incubator system that guarantees optimal conditions for bacterial cultivation. The silk ribbons and trim adorning your gown concentrate infectious particles in their delicate weaves while remaining completely impossible to clean without destroying the garment's appearance. These decorative elements become repositories for respiratory bacteria expelled by everyone you encounter, while their intricate construction provides countless hiding places for parasites and their eggs. The beautiful beadwork that makes your dress so fashionable creates an almost infinite number of surfaces where bacteria can accumulate and multiply, turning your ornate gown into a masterpiece of microbial architecture. Your velvet cape, with its dense pile and rich dye, has become so saturated with bacterial contamination that it functions as a mobile disease distribution center wherever you go. The fabric structure traps infectious particles from every environment you enter. While it's impossible to clean nature, ensures that these pathogens accumulate and concentrate over months of wear. The tuberculosis bacteria deposited in your cape's fibres during visits to infected households remain viable for months, ready to spread to new victims through the air currents created by your movement. The chronic skin infections that plague fashionable Victorian women result directly from prolonged contact with bacterial-laden fabrics that cannot be properly sanitized. Your dress traps perspiration against your skin, while the accumulated bacteria produce acidic waste products that break down your natural skin barriers and create entry points for more serious infections. The mysterious rashes and boils that periodically erupt across your torso aren't signs of moral failing. They're evidence that your clothing has become a collection of biological weapons aimed at your own body. Historians still argue whether Victorian textile manufacturers understood the health implications of creating unwashable luxury fabrics or simply prioritized profit over public health. But the correlation between elaborate dress codes and disease transmission patterns suggests that fashion itself became a vector for epidemic illness among the upper classes who could afford such dangerous luxury. The horsehair padding in your bustle creates an ideal environment for parasitic infestations as lice, fleas, and mites establish colonies in the organic material while feeding on the accumulated debris of months without cleaning. These parasites don't limit themselves to the padding, they migrate throughout your clothing ensemble and eventually to your body, carrying with them the bacterial and viral infections that make parasitic diseases so deadly. Your fashionable silhouette comes with a hidden cargo of disease-carrying insects that transform every social interaction into a potential epidemic event. The heavy brocade fabric of your evening gown traps so much moisture from perspiration and environmental humidity that fungal colonies begin growing directly in the cloth, creating the musty odour that you mask with increasingly heavy applications of perfume. These fungi produce toxic compounds that absorb through your skin while creating ideal conditions for bacterial overgrowth that leads to systemic infections. Your most beautiful gown has become a slow-acting poison delivery system disguised as high fashion. The tight weave of your woolen day dress prevents proper air circulation, while its dark colour absorbs heat that creates the perfect temperature for bacterial multiplication. The fabric acts like a greenhouse for microorganisms, maintaining optimal growing conditions while protecting bacterial colonies from environmental factors that might otherwise limit their growth. Your dress becomes a bacterial cultivation system so efficient it would impress modern microbiologists with its elegant design for pathogen propagation. The metallic threads woven into your formal wear create galvanic reactions with your perspiration that produce toxic compounds while providing mineral nutrition for specialized bacteria that thrive on heavy metals. These organisms produce waste products that cause the neurological symptoms Victorian medicine attributes to hysteria, while their metabolic activities create skin lesions that resist all available treatments. Your most expensive clothing literally poisons you through electrochemical processes that occur every moment you wear these elaborate garments. The fur trim on your winter coat harbours its own ecosystem of parasites and bacteria, while the tanning chemicals used to preserve the pelts continue to leach toxic compounds that absorb through your skin during wear. The formaldehyde and arsenic compounds used in Victorian fur processing create additional layers of toxicity that compound the bacterial threats already present in your unwashable wardrobe. Your fashionable fur accessories become weapons of chemical and biological warfare directed at your own health. The complex construction of Victorian garments, with their multiple layers, intricate seaming, and impossible-to-reach interior surfaces, creates countless hiding places for bacterial colonies that remain protected from any cleaning attempts. The bacteria living deep within your garment's construction multiply and spread throughout the fabric while producing waste products that gradually break down the fibres themselves, creating an environment where your clothing literally rots around your body while you wear it. The social pressure to appear in different outfits for various occasions means that your entire wardrobe becomes a collection of bacterial cultures, each garment harbouring different strains of pathogenic organisms while contributing to the overall microbial load that overwhelms your immune system. The fashion demands of Victorian society ensure that you're constantly exposed to multiple bacterial threats, while never allowing any single garment enough time away from your body to undergo proper decontamination. The synthetic dyes used to create the rich colours Victorian fashion demands contain heavy metals and toxic organic compounds that provide additional nutrition for specialized bacteria while poisoning your system through prolonged skin contact. The beautiful colors that make your wardrobe so admired result from chemical processes that create perfect conditions for bacterial growth, while slowly poisoning you through dermal absorption of textile chemicals. Your magnificent Victorian wardrobe, representing the pinnacle of 19th century fashion and social status, has become a sophisticated biological weapon system that combines bacterial cultivation, parasitic infestation, and chemical poisoning into a comprehensive assault on your health, disguised as the height of fashionable respectability, proving that Victorian elegance extracted a price measured in suffering and shortened lives. You sit quietly in your drawing room this evening, feeling the familiar ache in your corseted ribs and tasting the metallic residue of your morning face powder, completely unaware that you're experiencing the final symptoms of a way of life that has been slowly killing you for decades. The Victorian obsession with hygiene avoidance, toxic beauty standards, and disease-spreading social customs has created a perfect storm of health destruction that continues to echo through the corridors of modern medicine. Your generation's suffering becomes the foundation for medical discoveries that will save millions of lives, but only after your sacrifice teaches future physicians the deadly consequences of prioritizing social conventions over basic human health. The patterns of disease that devastate Victorian households provide crucial clues that will eventually lead to the germ theory of disease, the development of antiseptic surgery, and the understanding that many mysterious ailments result from bacterial infections rather than moral failings or hereditary weakness. Your death from what doctors call female complaints will contribute data to medical studies that eventually identify Streptococcus bacteria as the cause of puerperal fever, leading to antiseptic practices that will save countless women's lives during childbirth. The tragedy of your generation becomes the triumph of scientific progress. The tuberculosis epidemic that claims so many fashionable women leads directly to the discovery that overcrowding, poor ventilation, and contaminated clothing create ideal conditions for disease transmission. Your unwashed hair and shared cosmetics provide evidence that respiratory diseases spread through intimate contact and contaminated objects. Discoveries that will eventually lead to quarantine protocols and public health measures that prevent future epidemics. The consumption that kills you becomes the key to understanding how infectious diseases spread through human populations. The arsenic poisoning that results from your daily beauty routine contributes to medical understanding of heavy metal toxicity and leads to regulations that will eventually ban dangerous substances from cosmetics and medicines. Your mysterious symptoms of memory loss, skin discoloration, and organ failure provide physicians with classic case studies of chronic arsenic exposure, leading to diagnostic techniques that will save future generations from the vanity-induced poisoning that claims your life. Your sacrifice in the name of beauty becomes the foundation for cosmetic safety regulations. The cholera outbreaks that spread through contaminated water supplies teach public health officials the importance of separating sewage from drinking water, leading to the sanitation systems that will make waterborne diseases largely preventable in developed nations. Your death from cholera-tainted tea water contributes to the understanding that diseases can spread through contaminated water, leading to water treatment protocols that prevent millions of deaths from waterborne illnesses. The epidemics that devastate your community become the motivation for modern sanitation systems. The typhus and plague bacteria that spread through your unwashed clothing and parasitic infestations demonstrate the importance of personal hygiene and laundry sanitation in preventing disease transmission. Your death from typhus contracted through contaminated garments leads to understanding that diseases can survive in fabric and spread through clothing, contributing to the development of sterilization techniques and laundry protocols that break chains of infection. Your fashionable but filthy wardrobe becomes evidence for hygiene practices that save lives. Historians still argue whether Victorian society's health disasters resulted from genuine ignorance or from social systems that prioritized appearance over survival. But the evidence suggests that your generation's suffering was largely preventable through basic sanitation measures and medical knowledge that already existed but was ignored or suppressed by social conventions and commercial interests. The patent medicine poisoning that destroys your liver and kidneys leads directly to drug regulation laws that require manufacturers to list ingredients and prove safety before marketing medical treatments. Your addiction to laudanum and mercury-based tonics provides evidence that unregulated medicines can cause more harm than good, leading to the establishment of government agencies that protect consumers from dangerous medical products. Your poisoning by patent medicines becomes the justification for pharmaceutical safety regulations. The infections that spread through your shared cosmetics and borrowed clothing demonstrate that personal items should never be shared between individuals, leading to hygiene protocols that prevent disease transmission in schools, hospitals, and public facilities. Your death from diseases contracted through contaminated beauty products contributes to understanding that bacteria can survive on objects and spread between people through contaminated surfaces. Your vanity becomes the foundation for infection control practices. The dental abscesses and oral infections that claim so many Victorian lives lead to understanding that mouth bacteria can cause systemic diseases, contributing to the development of dentistry as a medical specialty and the recognition that oral health affects overall health. Your death from a tooth infection that spreads to your heart provides evidence that dental care is essential for preventing life-threatening diseases, leading to public health campaigns that promote dental hygiene and regular dental care. The menstrual infections that kill thousands of Victorian women lead to the development of sanitary products and hygiene education that make menstruation safe rather than life-threatening. Your death from septic shock caused by contaminated menstrual cloths contributes to understanding that menstrual hygiene is essential for women's health, leading to the development of disposable sanitary products and education programs that save women's lives worldwide. The food poisoning that results from your sewage-fertilized garden vegetables leads to agricultural regulations that require separation of human waste from food production, preventing the dysentery and typhoid epidemics that periodically devastate communities. Your death from contaminated vegetables contributes to understanding that human waste can contaminate food supplies, leading to agricultural practices and food safety regulations that prevent foodborne illnesses. The servant-transmitted diseases that spread through your household demonstrate the importance of providing adequate living conditions and health care for domestic workers, leading to labour laws and public health measures that protect both employees and employers from disease transmission. Your death from typhus contracted from your infected housemaid contributes to understanding that disease doesn't respect class boundaries, and that protecting the health of the poor is essential for protecting everyone's health. The bathing phobias that allow bacterial infections to flourish on unwashed skin here lead to hygiene education programs that teach the importance of regular washing for health rather than vanity. Your death from skin infections caused by months without bathing contributes to understanding that soap and water are essential for preventing bacterial diseases, leading to public health campaigns that promote daily washing as a health necessity rather than a luxury. The fabric-related infections that result from unwashable Victorian clothing lead to textile regulations that require garments to be cleanable, and to fashion trends that prioritise health over appearance. Your death from bacterial infections cultivated in your heavy, unwashable wardrobe contributes to understanding that clothing can harbour dangerous pathogens, leading to fabric treatments and garment designs that prevent disease transmission while maintaining fashionable appearance. Modern medicine owes many of its greatest advances to the systematic documentation of Victorian health disasters that claimed millions of lives through preventable causes. The suffering of your generation provides the evidence base for public health policies, medical treatments, and safety regulations that protect billions of people from the diseases that killed you. Your death becomes meaningful through its contribution to the knowledge that saves future generations from similar fates. The legacy of Victorian hygiene practices continues to influence modern health concerns as antibiotic resistance, emerging infectious diseases, and environmental toxin exposure create new versions of the health challenges that defined your era. The lessons learned from Victorian health disasters remain relevant as modern societies struggle to balance convenience, appearance, and social pressures with basic health requirements that haven't changed since your time. Your story, painful and tragic as it is, becomes a testament to human progress and the power of scientific inquiry to transform suffering into knowledge that serves humanity. The diseases that claim your life become the foundation for medical advances that prevent millions of similar deaths, ensuring that your sacrifice in the name of Victorian social conventions ultimately serves the cause of human health and survival. And so, as you take your final breath this winter evening, surrounded by the beautiful but deadly artifacts of Victorian civilization, your death joins the countless others who paid the ultimate price for a society's ignorance, but whose suffering had illuminated the path toward a healthier future for all humanity. Your Victorian world of elegant disease and fashionable death slowly fades into memory, leaving behind lessons written in the language of loss and learned through the currency of lives, teaching future generations that true beauty lies not in dangerous conventions but in the simple wisdom of clean water, soap, and the courage to choose health over harmful traditions. The story ends not with your death, but with the hope that emerges from understanding how deadly ignorance can be, and how precious the knowledge becomes that prevents such needless suffering. Sleep now, knowing that your story has served its purpose, to teach, to warn, and to inspire a better world where fashion never again demands such a terrible price, and where the pursuit of beauty enhances life rather than ending it. The Victorian age of beautiful death gives way to modern understanding that the most elegant thing of all is simply staying alive to see another day.